So as people are filing in, I just want to open up by saying Sat Sri Akal and welcome to all. Before we begin, we need to take a moment to acknowledge that the Sikh Foundation is based in Palo Alto on the traditional and unceded land of the Ramaytush and Muwekma Ohlone people. We recognize their ongoing relationship to this land and honor their history, culture, and continued presence. We invite everyone here to reflect on the land they are joining from today and the Indigenous communities connected to it. So welcome to our panel today on Sikh Ethics in an Age of Crisis, sponsored by the Sikh Foundation. I'm Anna Bigelow, and I'm delighted to be facilitating this timely and important conversation. I'm faculty in religious studies at Stanford University. It is very easy to feel overwhelmed these days with the relentless crises that face us on all sides, with war, displacement, genocide, and political violence, to the failure of our institutions, deepening inequality, and growing hostility towards immigrants and non-citizens. And here I'm thinking most immediately of Harjeet Kaur, who was deported in September at age 73 after 34 years living in the United States. It often feels that there's no respite, no place to find our footing and move forward. It is just at such times that it's so necessary to look at our traditions and teachings that support human resilience, that ground social justice and give us perspective. Sikh traditions, rooted in lived ethical, spiritual, and political commitments, offer us powerful resources for navigating such moments with clarity and courage. And so for that reason, we are delighted to be joined today by three scholars whose work exemplifies these commitments and whose insights are guiding us and guiding communities of learning and practice around the world. And so first, I will give a brief introduction to our panelists, and then we will have a series of questions that we will rotate through the panelists in order to get multiple perspectives on our shared concerns today. First, I introduced Nikky-Guninder Kaur Singh, who is the chair of the Department of Religious Studies at Colby College and one of the most respected voices in Sikh studies. Her translations and interpretations of Sikh scripture, especially of Guru Granth Sahib, have shaped the field and made Sikh philosophy accessible to wider audiences. I vividly remember reading her translation a long time ago when I first took courses on Sikh and Punjabi studies. Mark Juergensmeyer is Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Sociology and Global Studies at UC Santa Barbara. His decades of scholarship on religion, violence, and peacebuilding include landmark work on Sikh militancy and global religion, and he remains a touchstone for understanding religion's role in public life. And I vividly remember taking a seminar on religious nationalism with him in the late 90s sometime, and at his wonderful house and welcoming home in Santa Barbara. Mallika Kaur is writer, lawyer, educator. Her work centers on human rights, trauma, and justice in the Punjabi and Sikh context. She's the author of Faith, Gender, and Activism in the Punjab Conflict and The Wheat Fields Still Whisper. And she is the founder of the Punjab Justice Research Initiative. And I'm so delighted to be able to meet a colleague from across the Bay and to be in conversation with her today. So we wanted to start with, just for the sake of everybody in the audience knowing a little bit about your journey as an academic, as your journey as a scholar, and how you came into the work that you're doing, and what were the kinds of questions you started with on your path? How has that changed as you've proceeded? Are you still asking the same questions you asked in the beginning? And so let's begin with Nikki, if you don't mind, to share with us a little bit about how you started and now where you've landed, if you will.
Thanks, Anna, and thank you, Tanmeet, very much, and Kiki, for bringing us together. It is indeed a very anxiety-provoking period, frightening, scary. So to be together is really most meaningful. So heartfelt thanks. Where did I start? And here I am. I'm sitting in Maine. It's a beautiful day up at Colby College, where I've been for many decades. I grew up, I was born in India. I spent my first 14 years in India, in the Punjab. And, I just wanted to come to the States. My parents had been here. I got postcards from all kinds of, parks and so forth, people sitting in plates and saucers and so forth, cups. Where was it? In Disney World. And so it was like, oh my gosh, I have to be there. So I came quite early, and I came to a little girls' school in Virginia. And that's where, I grew up in the Punjab, post-colonial Punjab. We had been under the British, so all kinds of, westernization and kind of that false consciousness. So here it was in my high school in Virginia that I'm reading Walt Whitman, Passage to India, and kind of, who in the world am I? And also, Anna, because of being so far away, there was nobody to speak Punjabi with, all that I had kind of renounced and left became so much more important. So the Sikh world, the hymns that I had heard in my granny's lap and my mother and my dad holding me, all those became extremely rich. And there was no webinars in those days, no Skypes, no nothing. Phones were so difficult. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to learn about my own identity, my own heritage, my own literature. And so I started going, and then I went to college. And I must say, Wellesley College, liberal arts college, my faculty were so good. And I think I'm still stuck there because I'm teaching at a liberal arts college at Colby. And those 4 years were just fantastic because it just opened me up. And the professors were there. I could do Heidegger, I could do the Tao Te Ching. There was nothing on Sikhism, I'm afraid. There was nothing on Asia in philosophy. I wanted to major in philosophy. So I ended up doing religious studies where there was a little bit of religion, a bit of Asia, East Asia. And then for my honors thesis, I wanted to do something on Sikh scripture. And so I worked on it, and it was my professor did not know much, Professor Lucetta Mowry. She was into Christian theology, but she was very open and very encouraged me, very inspirational. So gave me a lot of freedom. And that's where I worked on my first little honors thesis, which was physics and metaphysics of the Guru Granth Sahib. And by that, I meant Guru, here it is, kind of this beautiful philosophy, revealed word, that metaphysical transcendent dimension. And yet it was such beautiful poetry, materialistically, physical. So I wanted to title it Physics and Metaphysics. And my poor Miss Lucetta Mowry, no, Miss Singh, you cannot do that because physics is this and this. But I was quite obstinate. I said, no, I want to do that. And to be honest with you, that's what I do today, because that the scripture is most important to me, and how its beauty, the poetic beauty, and its transcendent message, that very complex, beautiful, universal message. So that kind of an intersectionality, that's what I've been doing all my life. So at the beginning, as I did not know, I translated everything as he. That's how I'd learned. And it's very difficult to what we have internalized to get rid of that. But as in grad school and later on and doing other stuff, I realized that I needed to see with my own eyes. And then my first book was The Feminist Principle in the Sikh Vision of the Transcendent. So looking at the feminine aspect, and I found it was really quite amazing how much there was. And it was the AAR, American Academy of Religion Conference in 1984. And that's where I heard Mary Daly and Rosemary Ruther and all these Christian and Jewish theologians. And they were very inspiring. And they said, we need the goddess. And although we didn't have the goddess, I found so much there. So that's what I started doing, and then translations and so forth. And my recent one is Aesthetics of the Transcendent Aesthetics of Guru Nanak, which is really kind of going back to that physics and metaphysics of the Guru Granth Sahib.
Oh, I love that. It's wonderful to hear the story of your both the sort of a full circle that you continue in the same areas, but constantly expanding and constantly finding new perspectives. I think that's so really inspirational, and I hope to any young scholars out there listening to think about the possibility of continuing on a journey in this way. So thank you for sharing. Perhaps I'll turn next to you, Mark, and to just ask a little bit about where you started. And I'm not listing everybody's entire publishings because that would take the rest of the webinar, I think. But Mark, if you could talk a little bit about your journey in scholarship and where you started and where you ended, or are ending, or continuing.
Sure, I'd be happy to. But first, let me say, in listening to these eloquent comments of Nikki, I heard in her voice her father. And you should know that she comes from a very distinguished family. And her father was one of the great pillars of Sikh scholarship. Harbans Singh was just a remarkable person. I was privileged to know him. And I'm just so pleased and delighted to hear that his voice and his interest and his concerns are now continuing in the form of Nikki in her own voice, of course, in her own way of her own angle of vision into the Sikh tradition. But I think her father would be enormously proud. And so in listening to you, Nikki, I keep on hearing Harbans Singh.
Thank you, Mark. I can't
Yes,
thank
and
you.
I mean that as a compliment. Uh, well, I work, I'm a comparative sociologist of religion, and I worked all my life on the intersection of religion and politics. And much of my work was in India, specifically the Punjab, where I lived for several years and taught at Punjab University and worked on the role of religion in social change and social movements until the 1980s, and specifically 1984. And you know what I'm talking about. I'm sure anyone listening to this. The rise of Sikh militancy or militancy that not directly related to the Sikh faith, but by young Jat Sikh men throughout the Punjab stirred me enormously, not only for intellectual reasons, because I was interested in the role of religion and politics, but for deeply personal religion reasons. Because after all, when I looked at the people who were involved in the movement, these could have been my own students at Punjab University. And so I wanted to know why. Why was this happening, and what did religion have to do with it? So I took time off and went back to the Punjab and met with a number of these people, and they were indeed, like my own students, and my heart went out to them, knowing that the kind of bitter police engagements that they encounters that they might be involved in, and indeed, a number of them really didn't survive more than a year or two after my conversations. But what I began to understand was the role that religion plays so powerfully in human experience and in social frustration and the longing for new community and new forms of political identity in a world that's rapidly changing. And so I took this insight on the road, and for the last 30 years or so, I've been looking at the role of religion and violence throughout the world in many different places, in the Middle East and in Europe, in the United States, in East Asia. And I've found some remarkable similar kinds of things where this global frustration, I think, has employed many people and many actors to try to see the world differently, and often to carry out their pursuit of their imagination in regrettably violent ways. It's a moment of our this kind of moment. It's a time of this moment, our late modernity, when we're in the transition of something, not the old kind of nationalism and not quite a new globalism, but something in between, and often recourses to very authoritarian attempts to try to claim identity and power in a contemporary age. So these are the things that concern me. And I'm delighted to join this discussion because it seems to me that Sikh ethics really provides some great insights for our present condition.
Yeah. Thank you. I've always appreciated, Mark, the way in which you have shown curiosity and interest rather than beginning from judgment in your work. And I think that is incredibly helpful when thinking about, we must begin with understanding, right? Without that, where are we?
Mhm.
Mallika, if I could invite you also to give us a little bit of your story of how you started the work that you're doing and where you see it going now.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be here. As Nikki said, it's a challenging time, and being in community and knowing we can't see them, but we know there's 30 or more people who joined us and are listening. So it's nice to be together. My work, by way of interest in, I guess, feminist interest, has always been drawn to stories and conversations that I am told are not happening, have not happened, no one is interested in, etc. So this question of like, who's at the table, who gets to speak, and who is not, and who is spoken about, these are the questions that I think have always piqued my interest. I'm also drawn to in between spaces, kind of outside of the binary of all or none. And I think that drove me to look for both stories that hadn't been told or voices that hadn't been lifted. In our own more recent Punjab and Sikh history, I'm also extremely interested in people who weather multiple storms, not unlike the storms we are in the feels like in the vortex of right now. And I think I inherited that space of being interested in many intersecting oppressions right from my mother's womb as an 84 baby. So I grew up around in Punjab with parents who had well, I grew up a little bit in the US, but then most of my time in Punjab with parents who had decided to raise us there during a very complicated, difficult, heartbreaking time, and have watched trauma morph into a lot of different things and different reactions, and including the reaction that is shared by trauma survivors and armed conflict and state oppression survivors across the world, which Cynthia Enloe talks about how wars have their endings inside families. And that's kind of where my work has landed me now, where I am often looking at how trauma and oppression occurs within the four walls of people's homes and relationships. So I work in and with survivors of intimate partner violence and domestic violence in the Punjabi and Sikh community. The organization I run is actually, Anna, the one you mentioned had an interesting name too, but that's not my org. So I run Sikh Family Center. So I'm just going to share that here. So Sikh Families, I have done obviously a lot of work in Punjab as well, and then with the Punjabi and non-Punjabi community in the US around domestic violence. And doing that work, I again had this question of who are we not hearing from? And people would say, well, yeah, we don't have a Sikh or a Punjabi organization because the population's not there. If the population's there, it's too stigmatized. People are not going to come forward, which I've often thought and later realized is an assumption. Women and families do want to come forward. They want services. The problem is we don't have services. We don't have the connections to make those services real for them. We don't have the language, literal and cultural, in which people feel fully seen. So at Sikh Family Center, a lot of our work really is connection building, triaging in the face of now shrinking state resources in the US as shelters are closing, as helplines are narrowing their focus, as people cannot say words like immigrant and culture and gender. So we're facing that in the US in the US's cultural crisis moment. And then we're dealing with the culture and many both protective and danger factors that people bring from Punjab or that they brought a few generations ago from Punjab that have morphed into its own different now Punjabi US Sikh culture. So there's many different cultures. We're often negotiating even as we work with one survivor or one victim trying to work their way towards safety. And I think I was forced because of this webinar to think about Sikh ethics, and it's pertinent in I feel like I came to Sikhi through work I did as a rape crisis counselor in emergency rooms as a college student. And I have always found on the darkest days, I think the Sikh ethical imagination can really guide us to this place of not just blissed out Chardi Kala, like, oh, we'll just leave it to a larger, plan, but actually to real praxis. I think we have been given this mandate as Sikhs to not think of ourselves as saviors of any helpless, poor, bachare people out there, but rather as co-strugglers. So whether in the history of the 80s and 90s, or in the women and their advocates and families and supporters who I work with now, I find a lot of that ethic is alive and well despite the external challenges.
Thank you so much. And I wonder if I could just ask you to dig a little bit deeper there, because I think where you left off really is sort of where we were hoping to go next in terms of thinking about how the work that you do has shaped your understanding and your experience of Sikhi, and what are the concepts and the ethical principles, if you will, that are resonating for you both as you're doing your work specifically, but perhaps more generally also in this time that you have just so vividly described of challenges coming from so many multiple directions.
Yeah, I think Sikhi wasn't born out of comfort. I think is born with Guru Nanak as a child, putting aside culture and privilege, putting aside comfort and privilege, and was born in resistance. And to me, that means we have ample examples of a lot of fearless service, a lot of examples of belief in this radical idea of Sarbadda Pala, and I say radical because this idea that our liberation is bound to the liberation of all, and this idea that we are only as strong as our most marginalized people. We're seeing this idea all around us. Like there's those of us who are like, yeah, there's some immigration stuff and some bluster, it doesn't really affect me. But that means we're not talking to people, maybe in our kids' own school or their own cafeteria, or the family members of, their kids, other kids that go to school with them, even. We're just not opening our eyes to that. So I think we have, right, in Sikhi, this idea, and we have this beautiful, Shabad of Nicha andar neech jaat, nichi huat neech, nanak tin ke sang saath, vaddiyan so kya rees. Like, why would I need to imitate those with privilege and power? My solidarity, my call is to those who are the most marginalized. And I think that call has been so strong for generations for us that it seems impossible in this moment, especially for Sikhs, to just turn the other way and say, I'm okay, I'm still okay, or we're still okay, we're still not. Though we are, you mentioned Harjeet Kaur, and there's ample and an endless list of others. We work with survivors every day, postpartum mothers not going to health centers because they're worried the child has a US passport, they don't. We're working with people who've been turned away, with emboldened state officials who say extremely racist, anti-brown, or extremely anti-women and sexist things in this environment. We are hearing from people who do not know if they are going to be separated from their children at their next legally mandated immigration appointment, even though they have all the documents and they have never done anything illegal. So we are in this, we have a flurry of extreme, actually, desperation, and not just imagined anxiety, but anxiety that has been created and people are trying to live their lives despite of. And in all of that, I think the radical defiance that Sikhi teaches us helps us withstand. So those are some of the thoughts that come to my mind with why Sikh ethic, and for me personally, just doing, I don't remember a lot of our Path and Bani by heart, but I am trying to do Soila with my daughter every night, which is our nightly prayer, which is this beautiful embrace of fearlessness. And, again, fearlessness is not closing our eyes to things and cocooning ourselves away from the world. It's actually quite the opposite, like seeing the world for what it is, and still finding love and hope and warmth, and hopefully some good dreams in all of it.
Thank you. That's really lovely and wonderful to imagine that sort of generational journey that you're continuing there to bring some of these concepts and make them real for your own family. And I wonder, Nikki, if that resonates for you a bit, and the ways in which, working in Sikh scriptures your entire life, with your whole academic career, as well as I'm sure in your home life as well. How has that, the fact that you have lived as a practicing Sikh, that you have come from a tradition of a family that has always valued these teachings. You mentioned growing up with your grandmother singing in your ear and learning these stories. What of that is coming up for you now in this period of uncertainty and precarity?
I just want to say that I was so touched what you just said, Mallika, about Sikh ethical imagination being so praxis oriented, which is so right. And the way what you all do is, I truly admire you. I have great reverence for you, what you're doing. And for me, the scripture is everything. And for me, that, it really is that embodied form of understanding. To me, the poetry of the Guru Granth Sahib is kind of a basic, fundamental exercise for ethical action. So what you said, it's not, this is not poetry for poetry's sake, art for art's sake, but it is really transgressive. It is to build empathy. It is to build community. We can go back to Tolstoy and Santayana and Radhakrishnan and others who have been talking about art and literature and so forth, how it kind of expands itself and how it creates, you get tied with fellow humans. So to me, it's very, very important. And there are certain concepts here. There are things about the Sikh tradition which emerge from the Guru Granth Sahib, are repeated, so they become a part of you. So it's the most of it has been put into musical measures and so forth, so we can really absorb it, we can become it, we can change our attitudes and literally do something about it. So I would just mention the concept of unicity, where everybody, there's oneness, it's pure oneness. It's not one God which is out there, but it is oneness with fellow humans, with nature, with the past, with the future. So it's a very kind of an inclusive vision of oneness that comes with the Sikh religion, with Guru Nanak. He's the one who's kind of founding it, and that's very important. But at the same time, there's also diversity. So you cannot have oneness, everything is uniform and so forth, and we are all becoming one. You can't homogenize everything. So the diversity is very beautiful. And there's a beautiful statement by Guru Nanak, Jada dekhata jo tumhari tera roop kaneha, ik ta roop fire par channa, koi na kisi jeha. There's only one light, one being. But there's so many forms. Oh my gosh, Guru Nanak is marveling, wonder. That's the beauty of it all. And yet, no two are alike. So to respect diversity, and in a world where we are, which is so dangerously divided and polarized, to be able to see that we are all one, and yet we can be all different at the same time. I think that's a real fundamental principle of Guru Nanak that I want to emphasize, I want to practice, I want to promote with my undergraduate students that I teach. And that's one. And the other one, which is also, these are all interrelated, where Guru Nanak is conversing, dialoguing with the Siddhas. And there he says, who are to be honored, who kill their ego. So to get rid of that's the one that kind of is the wall that kind of divides us from fellow beings, and both animate and inanimate. But to see yourself in everybody, recognize yourself in everybody. That's a really profound statement, it has its own metaphysics. Sarab jiyan mein aap pachana. So it's not just mere tolerance of the other, but to see that self, that's really kind of very, very profound. So to me, that's very significant. And I want to practice it. So whenever I see people and, how, yes, they're different, but how it's really kind of creating a connection with people and to seeing our humanity. And the third principle that I find very important is, which is very different again, is the Sikh orientation towards this world, now and here. The infinite one, timeless, yes, but the time is always kind of intersecting with every instant, with every moment. And to make us conscious, what are we here for? So sometimes we are to some traditions and so forth, we are so oriented towards the heavens and life beyond that we kind of forget our responsibilities and our duties and what is happening here and now. And I think that by a filial kind of orientation that the Sikh tradition has is very, very significant. So you're made responsible to your fellow neighbors, wherever we may be. I'm sitting in Maine, that's fine. But I have to be kind of cognizant of where I am and who my neighbor is and what we can do. So those ethical principles are very significant. And also time like this when things are so, I can't read the New York Times anymore. Everything is just so depressing. Can't watch TV anymore. Can't watch the news at all. What does one do? you also need to kind of hear about beauty. And so the beautiful poetry kind of centers us. It's for all of us. And that's one of my, goals, not to make it, when we think about it, oh, it's Sikh scripture, it's things become very daunting. It becomes the other, it's a religion. But I want to see it as poetry, which we can all pick up and read. And there are these lovely verses, Guru Nanak, for example, in the Japji, Sat Sohan Sada Manchao. Sat, your truth, your beauty, and your enduring joy. And those kind of things do something, in moments of anxiety and fear and so forth. Just reading and really thinking about them, it kind of opens you up. And I hear also people like Elaine Scarry at Harvard and so forth talking about how we don't talk about beauty, how we've kind of forgotten it. And that kind of creates all this violence that we have. So those kind of things, what contemporary scholars are coming saying, I find a lot of it in Sikh scripture itself. So to kind of keep opening it, it's an inexhaustible treasury. So to go with it at every stage, and that, it just does something. And so listening to Kirtan and the hukam, there's all this anxiety, and you kind of open the Guru Granth Sahib, and there's a message. It's timeless. It doesn't have any, historical narrative, and yet it speaks to you. It really. So those are the kind of things that help and kind of give me what to do for the rest of the day, so forth.
Thank you. That's fantastic. And I love thinking about these sort of principles of unity and multiplicity, the recognizing the self in the other, the importance of not looking away, being aware of what's going on around you, but at the same time, recognizing that, perhaps in what today would be called a mode of self-care, right? Is the idea that you can't do that work. You can't keep looking if you're not also finding ways to reconnect with the core principles that allow you to persevere, to keep putting one foot in front of the other, turiya ja, right? To keep doing one
Yes.
thing after the other when it comes in your path. So I thank you for that reminder. I think we all need that, and thinking sometimes of appreciation and joy and beauty as and the ability to witness that is a kind of resistance to the constant barrage of things that want us to just give up and turn away, and not to become divorced from these things. But thank you so much. Mark, let's turn to you and see if, your work with Sikh tradition and with Punjabi history and life has always sort of been really concerned for questions of oppression and questions of marginality and social change, social justice, of course, now would be the sort of key term for that. But how have your intersections with Sikh ethics and principles informed or shaped some of that work over time?
It's been such a pleasure listening to Nikki and to Mallika, and to be reminded of the beauty and the peace and the healing that is a part of the Sikh tradition. And this provides a very strong antidote to the myth that somehow Sikhism is a violent religion. I get that all the time because I study religion and violence, and I said, my interest in this began with the situation with the Sikhs, and they say, oh yes, of course, because Sikhism is a violent religion. No, it's not. Where did you get that stupid idea? No, it's not. I mean, it's no more violent, pacifist than any other religious tradition. Yes, there is the tradition within Sikhism that you defend your own community, but that's true of every religious tradition. And it's no different than, say, the just war concept within Christianity, that there are times when you have to stand up for justice, and you have to defend justice, and you have to defend your community. And the same idea exists in Islam, in Hinduism, in Buddhism, in Judaism. In every religious tradition, there's the same notion that violence is not something to be taken easily. It's not something to be done capriciously. It's not something to be done for personal gain or for expansion or political power. It only has a role when violence is when you are yourself oppressed, when a community is under siege and you need to defend yourself. And then it is honorable to be able to defend yourself in such circumstances. That's true of Sikhism. It's true with every other religious tradition. So don't give me this nonsense about Sikhism is more violent than other religious traditions. I won't have it. And what Nikki and Mallika have demonstrated so clearly is that most of what Sikhism provides in a sense of ethics and of vision is really beautiful. It's generous. It's a part of the most noble aspects of the human tradition. And so I want to lift up what I think is one of the most significant and signal aspects of Sikh ethics, and that's the concept of seva. And it's true that other traditions have an idea of service and of compassion. And after all, some 10% of the Muslims' income is supposed to be for giving to the poor. The Christians have the same idea. But Sikhs seem to carry this to a degree that's really quite stunning and really quite remarkable. And then anybody who's not a Sikh knows that when they go to a gurdwara and they realize they can get free food. I mean, the langar is open to everyone. The kitchen is open to everyone. And if you go to the Golden Temple, you are just amazed with the degree to which volunteers have come to put in the time to chop up onions, to prepare the dal, to create this wonderful and really quite tasty lunch for everyone, without any question about who you are, or whether you've come with a good heart, or whether you're just there for the free food, or they don't care. Because you're a human, you need to eat, and the Sikhs will provide it. And it's not just the free langar. There's so many instances where Sikhism has, you see cases where Sikhs have moved in to help in a time of need. During COVID, for example, there were blood banks that were set up by the Sikh community in the United States and in India, where people who were in desperate need, hospitals had run out of it, but the Sikh community was providing that resource. In the United States, there were people who lined up to get free food, little boxes of food that the Sikh community was handing out for people during COVID who were not able to get food themselves, or who were not able to work and to make money. This kind of usually unsung generosity, and seldom does it get the kind of press that it deserves, but occasionally you do see stories about how a Sikh community in Vancouver, in Canada, or in California, or somewhere else in the world has stepped up to help everyone in need. And it's what Nikki says, is this realization that the truth is in everyone. God is in everyone. And every life is sacred, and every life is worth preserving, and to providing the necessities to live in dignity and in harmony with other people. So this, I think, I wish the first thing that people thought of when they thought of Sikhism was not the sword, but with the open hand, the food, the generosity, that to me is the signal aspect of the Sikh tradition.
Thank you for that, Mark. And I wonder if we could just continue with you thinking about the ways in which your work has, particularly as it pertains to religion and violence, or religion and conflict, has done, what I was mentioning before, this idea that you're always interested in understanding and contextualizing before, the idea that one is in a position as an academic to judge. How has your work with Sikh communities in particular, or individuals, shaped and informed your understanding of Sikh ethics as they're being engaged in moments of conflict?
My last couple books are, because I've done a series of books on the rise of movements related to religion, and I include the Khalistan related movement in the Punjab, although it was an insurgency that had really much more involved in it than Khalistan. And I include it not because it seems propelled by religious scripture by any means, but rather because most of the people were, in fact, of the Sikh tradition. It was some ways a defense of a community. And so in that sense, it is a part of religion can mean so many different things. And so people say, what do you mean about religious violence or religious related violence. I said, well, any way that you mean religion, because religion can be dogma, religion can be organization, it can be religious institutions, it can be religious faith, it can be religious community. And it's an idea of community, of ethnic community, that's in some ways being defended in these moments of conflict. And yet there is a sense in which people are taking up a position of militant defense to honor the community. And in my most recent books, I've been looking at how movements like this end and how they heal and what happens after them. And in my book is called Why God Needs War and War Needs God, that just came out this year with Oxford University Press, and a recent book on how God stops fighting, how religious violence ends. I've looked at several traditions and several movements in different parts of the world, including the movement of the Punjab, which is, after all, the one that started my quest. And so, after some 30, 40 years, I've tried to track down some of the old timers who are still around, because many of them were just kids when they were engaged in the movement. Gonna try to test how their lives are going now. In some cases, not so well, because they've been branded by the government and they've been excluded. Interestingly, some of the leaders of the movement have done, have resurfaced and more easily and more successfully than some of the foot soldiers. But in many cases, it's with a renewed vigor to try to serve the community. And in some cases, they found religion in a more traditional way, as an antidote to the kind of conflictual struggle in which they were involved before. I find that quite striking. That whereas in one case religion seemed to provide a kind of basis for fighting, in another case religion provided the healing balm, provided the source of regeneration and of recommitment to the quality of life within community, and not simply its survival. So it's been an interesting transformation, and to see this in the lives of people who've been involved in it. And you're right, Anna, my approach to try to study these things are to go and talk with people. Because it seems to me to not make much sense to simply sit in your chair in some study and think what people are doing or why they're doing what they're doing in different parts of the world. You have to get out and talk with them. And it's not an easy task, but it gives you a much more multifaceted sense of the variety of interests and motives and concerns that bring people to a particular moment of conflict, and then afterwards, in the process of healing and of moving on. It's a very human story, and one worth pursuing.
Yeah, thank you for that. Not only for reminding us all, especially those of us in religious studies, how complicated it is to define something like religion and
Yes.
all of the different ways in which it operates, and as both a structure and a concept and a practice, and all the other dimensions, or what our old friend Ninian Smart would have called dimensions, right? So
Right.
thinking long back. So I quickly want to just remind the audience that we'll have a few minutes for some general discussion at the end. So if you have any questions, please put them into the Q&A. And Mallika, I wanted to turn to you, and some of the work that you're doing as in the advocacy work in particular, with Sikh families, and is so challenging, partly because so often there can be stigma or resistance around talking about the difficult problems of domestic violence, problems of gender-based prejudice, etc. I'm curious what resources from Sikh ethical thinking has helped you to navigate what must be a very challenging balance to sometimes strike between being a community advocate and also trying to address internal challenges within a community.
Yeah, thank you. As I said before, these are definitely difficult topics. They're difficult topics in every community. The nature of gender violence is it occurs between individuals in very private spaces very often with very few witnesses, and yet it is entirely shaped by our society, our culture, and our context. And when I say culture, every university has a culture, every police department has a culture, every town has a culture, right? So culture is not spicy food, brown people, and colorful scarves or turbans. So I'm talking about culture as shared norms. And in the culture of the US, we have multiple women. The lower estimates are 7 to 10 killed every week. And not all of them are killed by intimate partners, and not all of them are brown, and not all of them are obviously Punjabi or Sikh. But in our communities, one of the reasons the stigma or one of the cultural challenges is not just stigma from within the community, it's also how people are treated on the outside. So when people go to a shelter and they're immediately asked, well, okay, will you be okay? We don't have halal meat. They immediately realize, okay, they don't first know, like, so they have to go into like a 101, like, I'm not a Muslim, but if I was, okay, like, so you have to kind of do the whole trying to explain who you are as a Sikh without offending people who are supposed to be serving you and meeting you where you're at. And sometimes it's way more extreme than that, right? This idea of the violent Sikh that Mark was talking about has permeated a lot of services and attitudes that are out there. And we had a woman at a domestic violence shelter who decided to leave because of comments the staff kept making about the violent Sikhs, a South Asian shelter, right, run by other South Asian women, serving largely in that area Muslim and Sikh women, but making a lot of Islamophobic and anti-Sikh comments. So these are challenges on the outside, and then what we have on the inside is the problem that people sometimes think they are very anti-violence and they're very progressive and they believe in all sorts of equity and equality till it comes to their own home and till somebody in their own home raises something. And that can be somebody who's on a Gurdwara committee, or that can be somebody who runs a huge nonprofit. So we come across those issues within the community where our Sikh ethic is very clear, that we have to speak about injustice and discrimination and violence no matter who is committing it. And that can make people very uncomfortable. So we have had beautiful examples of Sikhi, really the Khalsa walking the talk from Gurdwara when they take in girls and women and children from all sorts of backgrounds at times. And then they call us and say, this single woman can't keep living here on her own, or this child can't, we need to do something. And so we've partnered with Gurdwaras at many points. We've also had very difficult conversations and differences in opinion with Gurdwaras and other power brokers in the community when it comes to their relative's wife who wants a divorce, or because of domestic violence, or their own nephew who wants to raise an issue that's happening in the family that no one's talking about, or something that happened at an event they hosted and now no one wants to talk about the sexual harassment because that will make them all look so bad, and for the greater good the woman should just shut up and deal with it. So I think the moral clarity grounded in Sikhi makes us pretty unapologetic about, well, this is hard. It's always hard. It's hard for the harm doer or the accused person, but it is harder for the victim and the survivor. And that's where we want to come in and advocate. And just to this point of people not, women not wanting to talk about these issues, that's what led to me writing the book, Faith, Gender, and Activism in the Punjab Conflict. And the title, that was more the academic press title, but the Wheatfields Still Whisper, which was my working title for a decade of just, collecting stories and making sense of them and weaving and braiding them together, was all based on what is, when you come in with a curious feminist gender lens, is it that women don't want to speak, or is it how we're asking the questions? Is it that we walk into villages and say, oh, I'm documenting sexual abuse, does anyone want to tell me anything? And obviously no one wants to tell you anything. In fact, they're going to say, nothing happened in this village, nothing happened in that other village where a lot of our girls get married, and nothing happened in my daughter's village like her new home where she was married. So they will say, no, 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 in this entire area, Majid kuch nahi hoya, tusi Malve wal, so they will like send you to a whole other area, which makes perfect sense. That makes perfect, because that kind of denial is also protection and survival of people, not just walking in and asking people about the worst thing that happened to them, whether by police forces or police and alleged militants or actual militants or the combination, thereof. So women, when, they were asked about their lives and their hopes for the future and their concerns of the past that went unaddressed and unredressed, spoke about a lot of violence in police and secret police cells, as some of them talked about, and others about things within their own homes that they decided, which is completely their choice, to not lift and raise when they felt the entire community was under threat. And that's a double bind a lot of women face. You have multiple identities, and your identity is not only woman, your identity is also Sikh, your identity is also Punjabi, your identity is also somebody who wants to defend their community against external threats. So when they're negotiating all their identities, they're making complex choices. And it was fascinating that when one goes in asking about or wanting to listen to and sharing and exchanging life stories, how much more people are willing to talk about than we have ever assumed they wanted to talk about in the first place.
Thank you for that. And if I can just follow up with a question, a little off script for myself here, I'm curious if there are, either stories from scripture or history or passages that you found women particularly would come up over and over again, perhaps in, the kinds of when people are grappling with these really challenging transitions in their lives and a crisis and a change of relationship to their families or their communities. Are there things that people tend to turn to specifically?
I think it's what Nikki mentioned earlier is something Sikhi recognizes too, and all trauma studies promotes us to recognize as like the one size fits one.
Yeah.
Things for different people.
Sure.
So I think that's a really interesting question, but I think the answer, truthfully, would be it ranges. There are people who said, I did these many chopai subs, and that's what they did, right? Or these many, hasi kulla part rakhya, or they would do the entire reading, or they would do an expedited reading of Guru Granth Sahib. But there's also people who had one shabad, or a torture victim who I talked to, survivor I talked to, who basically said everything escaped from my head except for saying Vaheguru. And that's all I could say. And that's all I kept saying. But every time they heard me say it, I would be beaten more.
Wow.
And I think, that is something one hears, and it makes perfect sense, because it's not whatever's in the upstairs brain is not that rational upper cortex is not what kicks in during trauma. It's so much else in that survival mode. But there is this idea that we walk in the footsteps of giants, and this idea that a community that's seen sacrifices and has also seen fighting and waging battles, not only when we're under threat, but historically when the most oppressed around us are under threat. That idea, I think, came up very, very often, which led me even in the book to have two intertwined timelines, not just 1984 to 94. In fact, the book has two timelines. One's going from 1995 to 94 in a descending order. The other one is from the end of the Sikh Raj up to 1984, all those, decades and centuries before, because people would be talking about one thing, and then they'd say, oh, but like my grandfather in the Jetoda Morcha, so now they've gone into like colonial times, and then they would like rush ahead into something else, and then mention 1947 and partition, but then also mention, an assassination in the 1990s, all as one, which is, I think, which makes sense for a communal practice, our community, a very collectivist community where we have these intergenerational strains that we rely on, both in terms of making sense of our trauma, but also finding our resistance and resilience.
Thank you. That was really fascinating. I have so many thoughts, but I want to make sure that we have a little time for a few more of these questions. And Nikki,
and I've been looking at the questions while we've been talking. That's why I was peering off the side of the screen, and they look interesting.
I know. I was about to ask one of these questions, and I thought I would start with Nikki. One of our listeners has asked, what, as scholars of scripture and Sikh philosophy, would you suggest as a tangible action in order to align more deeply with these values? How can an individual heed the call to assist with the collective facing challenges? And you had spoken in your opening remarks a bit about some of the scriptures that you've been returning to, or the practice of hukam, for example, as a way of constantly renewing a connection with the Guru Granth Sahib. I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit more on some of the sort of tangible actions that that perhaps you yourself or you could imagine others finding useful.
And I think the best would be the spiritual kind of a journey, the passage that is enunciated at the end, finale of the Japji Sahib. You know, there are a few stanzas of it, and that's kind of a process. And I think that's very meaningful. And I return to that very often. And that's kind of putting us here. You know, it's a fivefold journey, whatever we want to call. And it starts out with the first one, which is Dharam Kand, which is really morality, but dharam, tarti, dharamsal. So in a way, and it really starts out with, you know, within night and day, within dates and days, you know, here we are placed for righteous action. So that's the first thing, to be kind of cognizant of where we are, where am I today, what has happened today, what's the country doing, what's the world happening. So the poetry is not something, the Guru Granth Sahib is not something to kind of passively return somewhere else, but to be actively engaged with the world. So you have to know where you are. So that's the first one, Dharam Kand. You know, it's really, the earth is placed for righteous action, and here we are located. So to be very aware of where we are, what's our surrounding, number one. Number two, we move on to after that, we move on to the realm of knowledge. And knowledge is wonderful. This is what I'm doing. I'm at an academic institution learning. What do you learn? Learn about diversity, various languages, numerous political systems, numerous gods, goddesses, scriptures. So the second realm is full of kind of being introduced to this whole variety of things. What does that do? Nothing. So the third realm is that realm of beauty and aesthetics. And that's where that knowledge is absorbed. And it's very interesting. The third realm, Saram Khan, the realm of beauty, aesthetics, that's not put under knowledge, but it's a realm of its own. And here, Tithe Kadya, Surat, Mat, Man, Buddhi. This is where it's a very cognitive, epistemological area, because this is where your surat, your consciousness, mat, mind, wisdom, and knowledge are refined. And you learn, like you gain morality, you gain an awareness. That's of the gods and, you know, devotees, Sadaki. So, and from there, you move into the realm of action, Karam Kand. So that's a realm where full of courageous heroes, you know, and the whole language, Karam Kand ki Bani Jor, it's all full of courage and heroism. Mighty warriors dwell here, men and women and devotees from all sides, and they are the ones who are acting. So that action that comes after moral, after knowledge, after being aesthetically, after being that knowledge which is embodied, then you act. And then it's very interesting that the realm of action is connected with the realm of truth. They form compositionally, they are one sphere. So you are in the realm of truth. So you're living out truth. So truth, the one reality, is not a concept, not a conceptual being out there, but it is truth. Truth, its name, which is to be lived out. And so here we have been talking about seva. Mark gave us beautiful examples of langar and selfless work, selfless ethics, working for others. But I also want us to remember that it's not only for the Sikh community, it's also for other communities. And this is, I want us to remember Guru Tegh Bahadur, the 9th Guru. This is his 350th martyrdom anniversary. And he gave up life for the liberation, for the religious freedom of others, not the Sikhs. He was not a he did not support the rituals of the Hindus, and yet he staked his life for that. And I think that's what Sikhism is all about, kind of. And moments like this, those residents of the Karam Khand, the fourth realm in Guru Nanak's Japji, they are the denizens, they are the paradigms. This is how we need to work, like with full courage, but after all those steps.
Thank you. It's a wonderful way to sort of think of this as a practice and a process rather than, beginning at any point at all. It actually, there's a logic. There's a reason that things need to unfold in a particular direction in this way of thinking. And I'm mindful that we've come to the end of our hour, but I know that there's some other questions here, and I wanted to give one to Mark, that perhaps we can then close with some final reflections from everybody after this. But there's a question about whether framing Sikhism as a religion or as an ism in general is entirely informed by sort of a colonial framing, rather than looking at Sikhi as this listener calls it, a lived philosophy or ontological discipline. So in your view, as a scholar who has been situated in religious studies adjacent fields in sociology, but also very much in conversation with religious studies for much of your career, how much do you see that as an external understanding of Sikhism, and what does the category of religion do for us when we think about?
I think that's the problem with a lot of religious traditions. We want to put them in a box. We want to, now we know what to think of them, and it's like this illusion of Sikhism, that violent religion. Well, no, it's not. But just the idea that you can define any religious tradition in simplistic terms. What do Sikhs believe, for example? Well, they believe all kinds of things, because it's not just a box of a code of ethics or a code of beliefs. You buy into that, and that's defines Sikhism. No, as the question implies, it's a way of life. It's the way people live, and it's the way. The term Sikhi, I think, is appropriately increasingly used to talk not just about a thing, but about a style of living and embracing a whole approach to living that is so much a part of the Sikh tradition. And for that, I think, the Sikh Foundation provides a really interesting template and a really good model for action, getting back to that question about action, the way of embracing the world and to show the tradition to the world in all of its beauty and all of its diversity and all of its complexity, and from children's books to great art exhibits to scholarly exchange. All of this is a part of the Sikh tradition. And then, of course, I'd add to that the powerful role that Seva provides in every religious community. And so many communities now, Sikhism and the Sikh tradition is known not as that violent religion, but that service religion, because they see people who are concerned about the world and concerned about their neighbors, and they're willing to take the time and effort to give of themselves to try to help other people in need. I think all of this is a part of Sikhi, that way of life that the questioner implied, that is really very true and very much a part of the Sikh tradition and the Sikh community that is lived today. And I've been such a pleasure in my life to be associated with it from very early days, and I continue to be. And I think we've all been enriched by those associations.
I'll just invite anybody on the panel who has any closing thoughts you'd like to share before we close up.
I just want to make a plea for aesthetics, the heightening, because the Guru Granth Sahib is offered as a platter, as a dish with three things: knowledge, truth, knowledge, and reflection, bringing us together. But it's not just to eat, and I think it's also going to Mark's langar, eating food, but also savoring. Savoring is very important. And I always like that word, Jeko khave, Jeko punche. Punche, to savor, was very important. But recently, I hear there's Laurie Santos at Yale University, and she teaches a course on happiness. And it's gone kind of crazy. Like 1,000 students have enrolled for it. And what she emphasizes is savoring. So I said, here is, Guru Arjan said it, centuries ago, how important it is. So at moments, anxiety and so forth. And savoring is kind of being very attentive where we are at the moment, to be totally focused. So I want to end with, we need to savor life, savor every minute, even the few minutes we have right now.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Mark or Mallika, if you have anything to share.
My piano tuner is here, so that's the noise you
So
hear
we'll
in the
soon be sharing
background.
the sound of the piano.
And then I'll make much more beautiful music, and I'll be able to have the taste in music that Nikki is talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful, beautiful note that Nikki's encouraged us to keep in mind and remember. And thank you, Anna, for moderating and bringing us in conversation together and to the Sikh Foundation. It's great to be here.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our audience who asked good questions, and our panelists for all of your wonderful thoughts and your rich stories. And I've learned a lot, and I have a lot to carry with me. Thank you to Kiki Kapani and to Tanmeet Gujral. Your work has been impeccable, and we really appreciate everything that you're doing, and especially for bringing this together. And so we appreciate all those who took time to spend with us today, and your presence and your curiosity are what help us to enjoy these conversations. So thank you so much. The Sikh Foundation is committed to holding space for Sikh art, scholarship, and community across generations. And if today sparked something for you, we hope you'll stay connected. You may be receiving a little survey afterwards, and hopefully it would be great to hear from anybody who would like to share with us about what Sikh Foundation could be doing in future conversations. So thank you, and we hope to see you again.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Mark. Mallika, all the
Good to
best.
see you all. Yes.
Really a
Thank you.
pleasure.